Go right ahead. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm Laura. I'm a learning experience designer at Lyft. So I create content that drivers consume. So not internal L&D exactly, and not quite customer education either. Some weird in between. And I also do a lot of teaching through online courses through Udemy and also through IDEO. So I do a lot of work in the world of design thinking. So if that's of interest, please connect with me. I do a lot of work there. And in general, I just think it's really fun to think about virtual classrooms. And my very favorite thing about presenting in virtual classrooms is having great co-facilitators. So Jesse, over to you.
Yeah, super excited. Hi, everybody. I'm Jesse Harris, and in my day job, I'm the Director of Learning, Engagement, and Culture for Virgin Orbit, which is Sir Richard Branson's rocket company. So I actually deal with rocket scientists on a daily basis, and I can tell you there are harder things than rocket science, like getting rocket scientists to participate in online learning. So we deal with a number of these challenges, and super excited to dig in. Nina, is there anything else you'd like to preface with and before we kick off our session?
No, I wouldn't do any better than both of you. And since you already got us started, thank you so much for joining tonight. It's really such a pleasure and honor to have such skillful people. And by the way, folks, it's not just what they described, they are also instructors for Stanford. So you're in great, great hands. So please enjoy the session. And thank you again, Jess.
Well,
And Laura.
Yeah, thank you again for the invitation. It's so great to get to travel across the country in 3 or 4 seconds, which is one of the really awesome opportunities. And one of the things that Laura and I thought a lot about at the beginning of the pandemic is that there are a lot of challenges that are ahead of us. We didn't know all of them. We didn't know what they would look like, but we knew there would be a lot of them. But we also knew that in that kind of liminal space between working from home and working at work for a lot of people, that there's lots of opportunity buried in there too. So our session today is really focused on how do we actionably mitigate some of the challenges, but also try to find those golden opportunities of what virtual classrooms afford us, and how do we do it in a way that builds trust with our audience. So we've got a 5-step process that we're going to walk through just as kind of an organizing principle of ways that we think about putting together virtual experiences. And if you know anything about the Virgin brand or about Lyft, it is all about experience, and that is kind of our bread and butter. And so that translates not only to our customer experiences, but also to the employee experience and the learning experience. So we're really excited to share some of these. Laura and I have a website where we collect, where we put a lot of information about our classes, about cool frameworks and articles and blog posts and videos, and you can find that at myjobisfun.com or myjobis.fun. And so we're going to reference that. We've also got several tools available there for download, which I will drop in the chat box, a link to the tools that we're going to review today. So if you want to go ahead and download those while we're kicking off an introduction, that's great. And if you want to download them after, that's fine too. So over to Laura to share a little bit about kind of how we get started.
Yeah, so in some ways, this is going to feel a little bit like a meta session because we're going to be trying to create some connection in this virtual classroom and some trust, while also trying to teach you kind of the framework that we use. So just wanted to preface all of these steps by saying we're going to kind of talk about the step, and then we're also going to talk about how we're using it in this moment as well. So very first thing, get prepped up. So I think it's so important to have kind of like a plan in action, which I'm sure everyone understands, but I think especially in the virtual space, you have to deal with video and audio, and there's always like a tech thing that happens. I feel like my AirPods always somehow like die in the middle of talking. So there's just a lot of preparation, and we have some frameworks that we'll share when we get to that section. Enter on action is one that we have in our physical classrooms as well, but I think is really important in the virtual classroom. And again, in that section, we'll kind of walk you through what some of the frameworks we use are, but just to kind of show you how we've already used it, that ice cream question and the music that we had on at the beginning was a way for you to feel like you were entering something that was already happening, as opposed to, I don't know about you guys, but I definitely enter a lot of meetings where there's like crickets at the beginning and you're not sure whether you're supposed to jump in and say hi. And then somehow people always seem to talk about the weather for the first 2 minutes of every call. So entering on action and trying to make it feel like that you're already joining something that is in motion. Building trust. So this is, you know, you might call it an icebreaker. There are lots of ways to kind of at the very beginning of a call, try to make sure that people feel comfortable with each other. We'll do that in a couple of pages, in a little bit. We'll do a little icebreaker with you that we love. Then there's the learning and doing, which is really the digging in. What is the heart of the session? And Jesse and I have some techniques that we use in the virtual space that we think are pretty helpful. And then I think as important as opening well, closing well is really important as well. And I think thinking about that closeout moment is also an important moment in a virtual session. And again, we'll share some frameworks and tips that we use to close out the meeting and feel like there's a culmination at the end, as opposed to kind of a slow fizzle, which is often, I think, sometimes the experience that I get at the end of meetings. So that's the general framework, 5 steps. We'll go through each of them again, like both on a meta level and on an experiential level, and give you some frameworks that we use for each of these steps along the way.
Awesome. And we're going to keep that instructional design hat on for just another moment as we talk about getting prepped up. And for us in thinking about this session, we really wanted to give you actionable things that you could walk away and have some tools to actually use. So this isn't a philosophical or academic exercise. All of our classes we teach with Stanford Continuing Studies, we're upfront to say this is a design activity. So we hope that you're on board for that. We in the link that I put in the chat box, we have a document that is what we call our cheat sheet for success. And this is an opportunity for you to go through and just kind of think through some different things. What, for example, will participants be able to feel, see, hear, think, and do? What's the frame of mind that they're bringing in when they join us? What's the time of day? How might that influence things? Do they have their iced coffee with them ready to go? Do you encourage that kind of participation? So we're not going to go through this in detail because it's a pretty self-explanatory document, but there is a lot of thinking that goes into the design. So just like teaching in a regular classroom, teaching in a digital classroom, that thinking about the end state and thinking about the beginning and bridging the two and how you help people learn is essential.
So then the next step, like we talked about, like I mentioned earlier, is enter on action. And so we have also in that compilation of things that Jesse talked about, Spotify playlists that we love. The one that I always use at the beginning is a playlist called Have a Great Day. And it's just these like really great upbeat music, or upbeat kind of mix of old and new music. So it's a nice range, and it feels like really, I think, happy when you join a call with upbeat music. And then things like lo-fi beats, which is really like if you're doing some independent silent work, having something on to again try to like cut that silence, the awkward silence that is so prevalent, I think, in online spaces. I always play a little bit of lo-fi beats in the background as we're working on projects or things during a classroom. Of course, there are the opening questions. So, you know, we have some examples, and again, that with that link that Jesse shared, some of our favorite online class enter on action questions. So ice cream is always our favorite, always our go-to, but we have lots of other examples on this worksheet. Yeah, so anything else to add there, Jesse?
Yeah, Laura, I just pop in to say kind of the why. So we're doing this in part because, you know, fun and experience, but also this kind of 5-minute small talk before a meeting is so critical to establishing norms. It's critical to establishing an emotional cadence to your meeting. And one of the things that we discovered early on, and you have probably experienced as well, is all of that context has been ripped from us, that there's no sort of organizational feel of how the day is going when you're not seeing people. If you've ever come in after a bad earnings call or on a difficult, Friday, or after something really exciting has happened in the company, you can feel that, and that's been stripped away from us. And so part of this is about bringing that back into the digital space. It's also for us as facilitators a great opportunity to gauge learning. So we'll let you in on a secret in that by asking you what you expected to learn, we got a good cheat sheet on what sorts of things you're hoping to take away and to calibrate, well, are we over-indexed here? Do we need to make sure we talk about something else? If someone came in and said, I don't understand any of the tools to you, what the best tool to use is, well, that might color how we present, and we might talk about that in advance. So it also is about learner motivation, and we get to that just by asking people. And so much of these tools that we learn about good instructional design in a physical classroom translate into this digital space. But for some reason, when we go to Zoom or we go to WebEx, we forget, and we don't stop to think about reflection anymore. We don't stop to think about preflection, which are so critical to learning. So Laura mentioned this idea of building trust, and Laura is the expert here, hands down. I'm going to, in a moment, we're gonna do an activity. What we'd love to ask is for everybody who's willing to participate in this activity and is able to turn on your camera. And this is one called Name Ball. And Laura, you introduced me to this, so I'll let you explain how Name Ball is played to everybody. It's good to see everybody. It's good to see some faces, so welcome. Laura, take it away.
Yeah, so I have a ball in my hand, and I am going to throw it to somebody else in the room. The way that you know that I'm throwing it to you is I'm going to say your name. When you hear your name said, you're going to catch the ball, and you're going to repeat your name to make sure that we're pronouncing it correctly. And then you're going to find somebody else in the room, and you're going to throw it to them. And it'll just kind of go around in a circle. Jesse, we'll do a demo with you. But the basic idea for now is just name, because it's a little bit of a large group, and we don't have a ton of time. When I wave like this, throw the ball back to me. So just say my name and I'll catch the ball. Because I'll show you kind of the next round. Usually it's name, and then there are a couple other things we can do. So this is how it goes. So I would have the ball and I'd go, Jesse.
Jesse. Melinda.
Yeah, the hard thing with this
I have to unmute myself. I'm a terrible guest.
Yeah, and this might be a good time to insert a hack for everybody. For games like this, it's sometimes hard with a big group to remember who's gone, who hasn't gone, and it's also tough to remember to unmute. I can't tell you how many times that's happened. So one amendment we might add is like, everybody just come off mute, and that'll be your signal that you are available to catch the ball. And after you catch the ball and you no longer are one of the people, you mute it, and so that way people have a visual signal of who they can throw things to. So Laura and I will go on mute. Melinda, ball's in your court.
Thank you. Amber.
I think there's two of us. I don't know if the other Amber is on camera.
Oh, there are.
There are. That's so unusual.
Amber Flanders.
What are the odds? Lena. Or Lee.
Fernando.
Thank you. Michelle.
Michelle, I think we're supposed to repeat our name, right? So Michelle.
Yes, I was going to come off mute and say it,
to Georgie.
Tony.
Tony. Laura.
Okay, so that's kind of the first round, and then you can just pretty much do any other topic that you want to do. So just because we're all primed with the ice cream question, now I'm going to throw the ball, and when you catch the ball, you say your favorite ice cream. So again, Jesse, I'm going to prep with you, and if everybody could come back off of mute, so everybody's off mute, I will send it to Jesse.
Jesse, Rocky Road. And I'm going to pass to Ken.
Ken and Stracciatello and Janine.
Peppermint and Kimberly.
Kimberly and chocolate chip cookie dough. Oh, and then I got thrown. Nina. Throwing it to Nina.
Nina, and mine is dulce de leche. Laura.
And mine is also dulce de leche. So as you can imagine, you can do this with any kind of question. And I think there's a lot of research around like synchronicity and the importance of synchronicity, especially in virtual spaces. So the more you feel like you're in sync with other people physically, actually the more connected you start to feel to them. And so part of Name Ball is, I know you all know there's not actually a ball that we are throwing to each other, but it does feel like you are actually playing catch with somebody, which is something you can't do in a virtual space. So bringing some of those more physical elements into a virtual space not only with this game allows you to learn about the people in the room with you, but also actually helps you to feel that connection to them because you actually are doing something at the same time together. So the more synchronous moments you can have, physical synchronous moments, the more connected learners will feel in the classroom. So this is just one of my favorite ways. Works best with a smaller group, but can be done with any size group.
Yeah, and in the chat box, I'm going to drop some additional warm-ups from a fellow instructor from the Stanford D School, the design school, and these are Zoom-friendly warm-ups and icebreakers. So this is a really quick list. And also, I'll just throw out. Laura and I teach classes on gamification. We love using games, game design for learning and change, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But at World Market right now, they're selling these like little, quick little card games like Did It Really Happen or Impossible Decisions, where, these sorts of things exist. They're super easy. You could just grab them and go. I do this with my team, like just a 5-minute icebreaker before a team meeting to say, would you rather be hot all the time or cold all the time? Would you rather know the future or be able to control control the weather? So, these sorts of questions, and it really does. It's just a really quick way to, again, like Laura said, make that human connection.
So I think importantly with, any kind of online class, in-person class too, you have to have the ground rules. So just sharing some of the ones that Jesse and I always have. Cameras on, we love seeing faces. It's really hard, I think, to talk to blank screens. For Zoom, we always go into gallery mode, which I think we forgot to preface our last game with, but I think at this point, people are more familiar with Zoom. Stay on mute until you want to jump in, and then trying to start as much on time and ending on time as possible. It's so easy in the virtual space to kind of trickle over. And so trying, especially in these learning spaces, to hold the space. And then using the chat box for sharing and asking questions. So this is a great time to remind you that, or to let you know that we are monitoring the chat, and I think we love seeing questions come in. So if you have questions or want to kind of build on any of the things that we are sharing, you all have amazing knowledge as well. So anything else that, if you have any great warm-up questions that you love asking, throw those in the chat. Anything to build on what we're sharing or ask questions about what we're doing.
Yeah, and just to put on that instructional design hat one more time, one of the cool things about doing an activity like Name Ball, which is one that we do with our classes at Stanford, is we don't have to ask people to turn on their camera. They expect that they're going to turn on their camera because your camera has to be on to play Name Ball. And if we've decided that that's what we're going to do. So it's also a way of creating norms around behaviors in a digital classroom, particularly if you're engaging in a series of classes, like when we teach leadership development, or we're doing a whole series with USC on talking about race at work. And that is, as you can imagine, a super emotional, supercharged, super important conversation that's very difficult to have in digital space. And it's essential that we be able to connect human to human. And so in these, in these ways, these kinds of activities, they do more than just, a silly icebreaker in our mind. They are ways of setting norms around behaviors. So there was one other thing I was going to say, Laura, but it's escaped me. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah, we can jump in. Actually, this next page is a nice build on what you just said. I think especially for groups that are going to be together for longer than one session, we also often use team agreements. So again, have an example of a team agreement that you can download, but it's basically a way to get to know each other first and then come up with some basic agreements. Usually I have with my virtual teams 5 to 10 agreements on, what do we want to hold each other accountable for? And this team agreements deck or document will help you kind of build towards that by sharing, what you are good at, what you struggle with, and then sharing what you think you need in order to make a successful team. So, so important to have some kind of agreement if you're going to have a longer term engagement with folks. Even for shorter ones, it's great, but I think usually for me, if I'm going to do more than one session with a group, I want to know that we're all aligned on the team agreements, especially in this virtual space where some of those things can be questioned or people are unsure about how to engage. And for the slides, most of what we're sharing is actually connected to that link that Jesse shared at the beginning, which I think he could reshare again in the chat. All of these documents are in there. So if you're looking for any of these things, that's a great place for it.
Yes, and we'll be sure to share the slides with Nina as well, and I'll drop that chat box. Sorry, drop in the chat box one more time the digital tools. For some reason, I have my Rocky Road was the text that I had copied and pasted, so I won't paste that. There you go. So as Laura mentioned, you know, this setting norms super important, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do in most of our roles is to help people perform more effectively. And so this is really the heart of our training classes, which is the learning and the doing. And Laura and I both ascribe to the understanding by design framework, or the backwards planning framework, of starting by thinking about what do we want people to be able to do at the end of a learning experience, and then working backwards into what is important for them to, you know, to be able to demonstrate, what are some of the things that are worth being familiar with, and then designing curriculum around that. One of the challenges with digital space, obviously, is that people's attention is really mitigated. Multitasking goes on, or I use that word, although we know that multitasking doesn't exist. Task shifting, and people who are checking email, you know, I've certainly been on webinars where I've done that. So if anybody here is doing that, I give you a free pass, but I would invite you to rejoin us in this section. And so we recognize those are challenges. And I think oftentimes as an instructional designer, I may stop and go, oh, that's going to be too difficult. But there also are lots of opportunities, as we mentioned, that this digital technology and this distributed workforce allow us. Some are pretty self-evident. So things like being able to record sessions like this one. It was a much more intrusive and difficult thing to record a session in a classroom than it is to just press a button on Zoom. So that's one thing that we know. Another is you can bring people together from all over the country. We've got folks from all over, and you know, us two at least from California, from the crazy coast. So we're super excited about that, and that's a really cool thing for businesses, that you can now have these sort of synchronous learning events. We're going to share with you one of the other really cool techniques that we love. And this is using Google Slides or some other similar collaborative learning tool or collaborative document tool. And I know that not all organizations and not all companies allow for Google access. Folks may not, you know, have access on their work computers. So if this doesn't work for you, you might think about Microsoft, or you might think about some of the other tools. We've listed some of these here that allow for collaboration. We're going to show it to you in Google. And if anybody doesn't have access to that and isn't able to participate in this, we're happy to share our screens, and we'll show you what that looks like. So in this case, you're all here because in theory you want to learn more about presenting in a digital space and building trust with your learners, as do we. And so this is a chance for us to get into that learning and doing portion. And so what we're going to ask is, we're going to ask you to think about this. If you had an hour to learn a new skill, what would that skill be? And Laura just dropped in the chat box a link to a Google Doc. And so I'd encourage you to click on that and open it up. You don't, I think, have to log in. I think it's open to just anybody. And you're going to notice that there are a couple slides. So one of those slides is for letters A through M, as you see on the screen, and the other is for letters N through Z. And we just want you to click on one of those boxes, and you may have to copy and paste one, but click on one of those boxes and give us a couple of topics. So if you had an hour to learn a new skill, what would it be? And just drop it in there, and we're going to collaboratively come up with a list of interesting things you'd like to learn if you had an hour to learn any new skill. So I see some folks popping in already and putting in information. We'll give you about 60 seconds to do that, and we'll rejoin you in just a moment. All right, if you've dropped in one or two feel free to drop in another. I personally fall down the rabbit hole of learning, and you know, I have the best of intentions. I bought this masterclass recently and thought, you know, gosh, I'm gonna watch this, and I've, you know, of course, watched 20 of them. So I know all about magic. I know about plants. I know about design. You name it. So we'll pause there for just a moment, and what I'm going to put on the meta hat again. And what I'm going to share is that, like, what we've done here is similar to what we do in the real world, in the real classroom, where if you've ever put up on a whiteboard and asked people to write on Post-it notes and drop their ideas, we've done this in a digital way. One of the cool things as a facilitator for us is that from our end, we can actually look at what you're doing, and we can watch how you're progressing. And so think about how you might apply this. For example, if you had a number of groups that you wanted to use breakout groups, and you wanted them all to talk about to answer these three questions. So you could create a different slide for each group, group 1, group 2, group 3, send them out into their breakout rooms, breakout 1, breakout 2, breakout 3, and ask them to fill out the document. And then as a facilitator, you can hang out in the lobby and you can watch their progress of what they're putting in. And if it feels like, oh, they're maybe missing the mark, or this group may need a little more support, or this group looks like they're having a great conversation, it allows you to zoom in and to do that. And that's something that's a little more difficult to do in a physical classroom, because it feels a little intrusive to just walk into a group as they're in process. And so this tool allows you an ability to do that. I've done this with executives for an executive offsite. We've done this in our classes around equity, diversity, inclusion, around leadership, technical training, you name it. This works pretty broadly. One of the things that I added just now into that document, if you go back into it, is a fourth slide, which is now a axis. So this is another cool thing that you can do. So what I'd like for you to do is go back to your original card that you created, that thing you'd want to learn if you had an hour to learn anything. And I want you to just cut that square from that document. And then on this last slide, slide 4, I want you to paste it and drop it where on this axis it belongs. Is it more relevant to work, or is it a topic that's more relevant to life? Is it a topic that's pretty simple to understand, or something that's more complex? And I want you to just plot that on this axis, and we'll give you about 60 seconds to do that. Right. Looks like most folks have been able to move it over. We've got the smooth, slow jams for a Thursday afternoon. I love that. So let's take a look at what we've done, again, putting on that instructional design meta hat and taking off our participant hat. So what we've done here is not only to crowdsource, which is really cool, we've also gotten you to rank and sort some things. So think about if what Laura and I were actually doing here was to think about topics that we want to teach. For example, we could do this with like in my technical training classes. So we teach rocket scientists and technicians how to build things, how to, engineering principles, tolerancing on, all this kind of stuff. And one of my favorite things to do with that group is to go, what sorts of things do you want to learn? And it's interesting because it oftentimes is, I'd like to learn how to have a difficult conversation, or I'd like to learn, how to celebrate one of my teammates when they have a service year anniversary or things like that. Very rarely is it I want to learn how to use a torque wrench more effectively or what have you. But what this allows us to do is if Laura and I were looking for simple things that we could do that would be relevant to work, we might look in that quadrant and say, okay, group facilitation. So maybe we could teach a class on group facilitation. We could look for patterns of, are there multiples where people have the same thing. We could also create another slide where we have a bunch of just red circles that we've created, and we could ask you to cut 2 of those circles and to put those 2 dots on any 2 items that you really identify with, that you also want to learn. So it allows us to use that dot voting that you see in a classroom now in a digital space. So Laura's done that with, I think that's Laura anyway, with stars. And so again, the possibilities are pretty endless with this digital collaboration tool. And this is a document that originally was used to create PowerPoint presentations, basically, which is the form that we've used it for in our presentation today. So some pretty powerful tools. The goal is to use them collaboratively. Yeah, Laura, other thoughts? Oh, Laura, you're muted. It's the first you're muted of the day.
My gosh, yeah, gosh, thank you. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, you know, I see that it looks like Sean has used this before. It looks like a couple of folks are saying great idea. Yeah, I think when Jesse and I came to this realization that we could use such a simple tool to do something that feels really powerful, we were, I feel like we rarely host a session where we don't use something like this, because it's so easily adaptable to be, you know, used for so many different topics, like Jesse was talking about. So cool that it is being used elsewhere in the design thinking workshop as well. We will probably just keep going, but like I mentioned before, if you have questions or you want to just kind of jump in or pause, you know, if you have anything that you want to add or build on what we're sharing, please feel free to throw that in the chat. Always love having questions to answer. So yeah, so I guess we did this, and I think that, yeah, back over to you, Jesse, I think.
Yeah, this sort of work is what Laura and I are passionate about in our full-time jobs. It's why we do what we do. And it's part of the reason we created this My Job is Fun website, because, you know, I recognize that you know, not every organization has the culture of a Virgin organization or of Lyft or of Google or Facebook. You know, I've worked at organizations of all sizes, stripes, and levels of complexity and industry. But this novel approach to creating a fun environment or an engaging environment, you know, it's really critical to learning. We know that engagement drives learning, and that practice drives learning, and those 2 things can be really challenging when you are in a distributed workspace. And so this is largely what we do. And as I mentioned, it's part of what we've created. You know, this website to support.
Oh shit.
Hot mic. So what a couple things that we like to bring to the digital world and also the physical world once we're back together. One of them is, if you'll go to the next slide, Laura. Somebody, you know, we mentioned it earlier, this idea of gamification, of how do we use game design for learning and for change. And Laura and I, in our design classes, we actually borrow a lot of our techniques from game mechanics. So we think about things like time pressure. If as a spoiler alert, I was a contestant on The Price is Right in 2019, and it was an incredible experience. I won big. Yes, the wheel is as heavy as they say, and yes, I got to meet Drew. Happy to answer other questions, but it was super cool. But I played a game called the Clock Game. And in the clock game, you have to guess the price of 2 items by saying, you know, a price, and Drew would say higher or lower. So it was 4 watches, and I'd say, okay, it's you know, $500. He'd say higher. I'd say $600. He'd say lower. I'd say $550, and you keep going back and forth. But you have to do that in 30 seconds. So that uses time pressure as a way to drive motivation. That I was really motivated in part by the clock. It was also the $10,000 worth of prizes across the stage that I was really excited by. But so Laura and I look at games like that, and we think about how do we borrow from that and use them in both physical classrooms and digital classrooms. And so you could think of lots of ways that you could use time pressure in a meeting. For example, with brainstorming, we sometimes will set a timer for 10 minutes and ask people to start by thinking themselves for 10 minutes or for 5 minutes, and then talk as a group for a larger period of time. And again, that time pressure, it's just an artificial way of driving some engagement. So we borrow heavily from gamification. So that's certainly an area that we love. The next area that I think that certainly Laura and I both have a passion for is design thinking, something that we both studied at Stanford. We're both graduates of the Learning Design and Technology program at Stanford, and Laura teaches as adjunct faculty at the Stanford D School. And so we've again, on our website, we've got several tools related to this. This summer, we're teaching a class around rapid prototyping, but bringing this idea of how do we leverage what we know about design thinking into our classes. And then the third is something I have a personal passion around, which is escape rooms. So we build mostly in the physical world, but these escape rooms. And in a digital space, there's still opportunity to borrow from what makes an escape room fun. So solving puzzles together, being able to have some time pressure, the idea of achievement. And so one of the things we do at Virgin Orbit that is somewhat related is we'll have with our people team, for example, we start our meetings with a bit of a game, some sort of, like a this or that game, or as I mentioned earlier. This is a really great way for us to, again, build engagement, try to be more human at work and with each other, and to realize that just because we're on looking at a screen doesn't mean that we're not engaging with human beings. So all of these things we've created and could talk for forever about, so we're happy to chat about that if anybody has interest in any of these areas or wants to nerd out about design thinking, or any of those topics, we'd be super excited. So
yeah, there's actually a lot happening in the chat. Just I know that you've been talking so harder to follow the chat, but I think a lot of chatting about tools. So I know Miro and Mural have come up. I think Jesse and I both feel like Google Drive is still the easiest solution. But I also saw a question from Nina. I'm going to scroll back to it. How do you re-engage someone who seems distracted or multitasking when you really need their attention is the question. And so, Jesse, I might throw it at you and then I can take a stab. And then I love opening it up to the broader group to see if others have strategies. So Jesse, maybe you can take a first pass at the question, and I might stop sharing so we can see everybody's faces.
Yeah, while everybody is coming up with the right answer, I'll give you a quick answer. How about that? I think this is a perfect point where one of the adaptations that we've really leaned into is this idea of having a co-facilitator to do just what Laura did, which is like, hey, there's something going on over here that you can't, it's difficult for you to focus on. In the same way that if we were teaching a class with 100 people, it's really difficult for one person to facilitate that. And so that ability for that co-facilitator to zoom in and maybe to send a quick ping, or to chime in and say, hey everyone, let's take a 2-minute break just to stretch. I know that it requires a lot of attention. There was a really interesting article in National Geographic that was published, I think this week. I read it yesterday, but that was talking about some of the physiological elements of why Zoom fatigue is real. And it has to do with staring at ourselves. Like right now, I'm looking at myself and staring at myself to make sure I don't look silly. But also the distance that we have to people, this sense of you all are looking at your cameras, but as a facilitator, it feels like you all are boring into my skin and just all staring at me. I'm sure you've had that feeling before. So sometimes just taking a couple minutes for a refocus is helpful, and it helps people bring their attention back to where we are. But much like in a regular classroom, sometimes the one thing we can't bring people is willingness to learn. They have to bring that themselves. And so if it's a behavioral thing where someone is distracted or not paying attention, the same interventions I think apply here that they do in a physical classroom. But I'll open it up. Other thoughts from folks in the crowd?
It looks like Jen. Oh yeah, go for it. Go for it, Jen.
I was going to say, I think having a producer or a co-facilitator is the most important thing I've learned over the last, 16 months. It is next to impossible to do even an hour of this by yourself. So
I think we've both tried and agree. It's so much better to have somebody else next to you. I was just going to call out, Jen says she made a group of 4. The trouble was getting them to talk to each other at first, not everyone, but it was a conference and there was no connection. Yeah, so that was in response to a different question, but I think actually is one that I was going to say in response to Nina's question is, just making it so that you feel like you're connected to other people in the room in that moment. So if you're noticing people drifting off, that's a great moment to use the breakout room. and force people into a smaller situation where people are more likely to share. Because I feel like in this bigger situation, it's so easy, and I do it all the time, you know, to drift off. But if you're in a group with 2 other people, then it's a lot harder to drift off. So while I think Joan's answer was in response to Kimberly's question, I think it's a great response actually to Nina's question as well.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any strategies? Yeah.
One of the other things that I'll build on that, Laura, is one of the things we found is for things that are emotionally that require emotional investment or vulnerability. So topics that require vulnerability, leadership, conflict, these sorts of things, but also things that where there might be a difference in knowledge, or you know, I deal with rocket scientists who know a whole lot, but there are things that they may not know. So there may be sensitivity about those things. These breakout groups of 2 and letting people have sort of a think and then a pair and then sharing out is a great opportunity to get people engaged. And sometimes, you know, with a co-facilitator, you can do that on the fly and just say, hey, let's do a quick breakout, and auto assign people to pairs. So those are all great suggestions.
One other thing I see Sean shared in the chat that when he's unengaged, he'll like go on a bike in his office and will listen and be biking. I've actually heard of people who facilitate meetings and ask their participants to go on a walk while they're listening. So you obviously wouldn't be able to have any visuals associated with your training, but if it's something that they can just listen to, saying like, this is your opportunity for the next 45 minutes to actually get up and go walk, so that you can actually listen. And I think it's easier to listen when you are walking than when you're just sitting at the computer and you have so many other distractions. So nice, get a shot of the bike. Yeah, so I think actually physical movement is definitely a way for people to feel connected. And so as a facilitator, thinking like, can we just change the setting that the participant is in is kind of a fun thing. I've not tried it myself, but I think it's a really interesting idea to send people out for a walk, and that's how you keep people engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else to add, Jesse?
No, I think those are all great. But to tie it up, what I just share is that you know your organization better than anyone, and so think about what your organization will sort of let you get away with in terms of having fun. You know, in terms of engagement, in terms of, are you a cameras on, camera off culture? And try, you know, what I'd encourage you to think about is, how can I push it just 10%? So if, you know, at my company, we're probably about half and half, cameras on, cameras off. So I try to push it just 10%. So it's not, you know, the patient doesn't go into shock, but I'm definitely nudging us in a direction to be collaborative, to make eye contact, and to be present. So super excited to share more about that. And we can talk more about it during Q&A at the end if anybody is interested.
So getting close to the end of the session, like Jesse mentioned, we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end, but wanted to talk about this idea of closeout and goodbye. So intentionally leaving the space for reflection and for feeling like there's a moment of finality. One of the things that you'll find in that link that Jesse shared is some of the activities that we do. I love doing something called a pre-mortem. So like if it's at the end of a long session with the same group of learners, I'll say, you know, imagine it's 6 months from now and you've totally failed at learning the thing that you were supposed to learn, and you haven't implemented any of the changes we've been talking about. What happened? Like, why didn't that happen? Why are we failing at implementing this? So it's just a fun way to kind of get you to think a little bit into the future, and it helps you plan and take the learning that you're having in the space outside of the space, which is something I know even in person I struggle with, helping learners remember all of the amazing things that we talk about during a session or during a class. And then one that we often do is I wish I learned. This is really great feedback for the facilitators, and if we have time, we might ask you guys to ask to put an I wish I learned in the chat. But you know, basically there's lots of other examples of closeout activities. I think remembering to have something at the end is really important. Then oops, I always click on these links, so each of these are hyperlinked out when we send out the deck. My favorite thing is we will always end our videos with a themed photo. So this is from a class that Jesse and I taught at Stanford Continuing Studies. We give the learners a theme and then we take a picture on that theme. So what's great about this is it feels like a final moment. So we take the picture and then we say goodbye, and then we end the Zoom call. So it doesn't feel like everybody's kind of trickling out. We have this together moment, again, trying to create those synchronous moments. And we also then end up with a photo gallery. So for a class that you're teaching over several weeks, it's really fun to have like a silly photo gallery that you can share out and share back with the class as a reminder of the people that were together. So I think these are some of my favorite photos from the class that we taught last year. Another hot mic, I think. And yeah, so I think with that, that's the majority of what we have. I know, Jesse, there are a couple more slides. Just wanted to remind you the overall framework, get prepped, enter on action, build trust, learning and doing, close out and goodbyes. So Jesse, I'll throw it back to you for the last few slides.
Awesome. And perhaps at the end of our session today, don't let's forget, let's take a photo so we can mark that moment. So yeah, we've shared a little bit about what we're passionate about. We're super excited. We want to open up for questions. Just a couple quick things. If you haven't seen already, we've got lots of tools around different topics related to making work more enjoyable on our website. We also, as I mentioned, teach courses from time to time, so those are available there. We have a course on gamification for instructional design, and just recently have published a workbook that we use for our Stanford classes around using gamification for learning and 10 mechanics that turbocharge engagement and performance. So those are all, we have all those on our website. And we love connecting. So if there's any projects or things that you're interested in talking about, happy to chat. We both work full-time jobs, so we're practitioners, not consultants, but we are happy to consult on projects and do things that are super interesting. And we love just being connected. So please add us on LinkedIn if you haven't already. And we're excited to chat more. So we'll end our formal presentation here and love to hear questions and chat a bit more. Cool. Yes, awesome. Enjoying the, thanks for dropping in the LinkedIn stuff. We'll add that. Questions from anybody that before we do an I like, I wish, I wonder activity?
Well, no questions. I can't believe this, almost an hour went by. Thank you for your energy and for all of these really great ideas on quick tips, things that I'm even wrestling this same week with all these tools. It really makes life a lot easier just to use a Google document. That's a great takeaway. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, such a joy. Like, I mean, this connecting with one another, like none of us are as smart as all of us. And a lot of us deal with the same exact problems and, challenges. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned from the pandemic is, to try to view things like, yes, acknowledge the challenges, but also look for the opportunity. And there is tons of that in a digital space.
Hmm.
Any other questions, folks, or comments? And thank you for your feedback, Fernando.
No questions, but just comment here while we're going through the session. I was just brainstorming on some of the things that we could use. I mean, this is something I always try to do at work is give the learners something. If they're spending their time or money, they've got to get something out of it. So definitely getting something out of this because there are definitely some tools I think that we can start using the next day. So I'm going to share this out to some of the team here. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Jess and Harry, and Jess and Laura, sorry. I was thinking about somebody else, apologize. With technology and all of the apps and tools and this and that that's coming out, is there something that's easily customizable? Because what I'm observing is that we just had an exchange on Miro where you would see that some people struggle to use Miro and that Google Docs would be a simpler solution that produces the same effects, right? So are there other apps or tips that you would you would leave us with? Simple to use. I forgot to mention that.
I threw one in the chat, which is Padlet. Padlet is like probably the easiest of the digital tools. You have a limited number of Padlets you can create, but it's basically just a digital whiteboard where you can put lots of Post-it notes. So I use Padlet all the time. It's probably the most intuitive, and nobody that I know yet has been blocked by their company computer from going to it, like Google Drive I know is for some folks. So that's one tool that I definitely use. This is definitely also one that I would love if there's anybody in the group who has tools that you use. I know Miro and Mural came up as difficult ones. Any that you guys have found that are easier to use for digital collaboration?
I personally think every week Microsoft Teams gets better. You know, it's not a great product, but man, it gets better every week. So
poll everywhere in the chat. Yeah, Nina, I think that's
yeah.
It's one that certainly I've always been averse to using polling, and yet it is a super helpful tool just for quick reactions. I think that's great. I should also preface by saying Laura and I both did, as I mentioned, a master's degree in educational technology, basically, and design. And I went in thinking that I was going to come out, and have the best startup, the best app that was going to solve all the problems for corporate learners. Laura and I both were more interested in sort of adult learning than in K-12 learning. And I left that program highly skeptical of any technology. In fact, I talked to maybe one vendor every quarter, because oftentimes technology is led, especially educational technology, is led by the technologists and not by the educator, and oftentimes not even like remotely consulting the educator. It's a can we build it, not should we build it, and how should we build it. And so for that reason, I think a lot of times a lot of technologies, there is no silver bullet, and there are a lot of really rusty, ugly bullets as well. So just because it has a high price tag or comes from an organization you've heard of doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be helpful. Sometimes there's a simpler tool.
Absolutely.
Cool. I also think it's important to acknowledge the digital divide and the challenges of equity when it comes to technology. That sometimes things like broadband access or access to technology, or to to having a quiet space in your house where if you're working from home and not I don't have children, I have a husband, and I have a garage office, so like I have all kinds of advantages there that lots of folks don't. So thinking about that designer at the beginning when we talk about getting prepped up is super important. Cool. If there are any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. Laura, any closing thoughts?
Well, I was hoping maybe we could just do a quick I wish, I learned in the chat. So it's a pretty easy activity. It's just you finish the I like, I wish, and then I learned. So what's something that you liked about the session? What's something you wish you'd seen that we could have offered that we didn't? And then what's something that you learned? So something you might take away. And I'll play just quick music for a minute. It won't be very long, but it's always really helpful for us to get quick feedback at the end. So I will play just a little bit of music. And we'll do just 30 seconds in the chat. If you don't mind giving us some feedback, we always, feedback is a gift, we say in the design thinking world, and we really do mean it. So we appreciate all the thoughts that you can give us. Awesome. Feel free to continue throwing things in the chat. Again, feedback is a gift and we really appreciate it. But we also thought we would, like we do with all of our classes, end with a themed picture. So I'm going to take a screenshot of my Zoom screen. And if you're able to come on video, that would be great. And our theme for today is trust. So however you can demonstrate trust in this little box that you have. Trust is an abstract one, so this is going to be hard. I love it. But I think it's a great theme. So we're going to do trust, and I will count us down. You can grab anything that you have around us, you know, whatever you have in your physical space works. And we will count down from 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. It was really great hearing your comments in the chat and seeing you guys. And please stay in touch, like Jesse mentioned. Find us on LinkedIn and myjobisfun.com.
Terrific.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh my goodness, thank you so very
Great
much.
job.
Thank
Jess
you.
and Laura.
Great
This
job.
was really great.
Nice, sure.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you both
Thanks,
so
everybody.
much.
This is so much fun.
Thank you
This
both
was
so
great.
much.
Thank
This
you.
was great. I really appreciate it.
Let's do it again.
Yeah.
I'll follow up with you, Jesse and Laura. This is really awesome.
You should follow their posts. Jess is very prolific and always has something.
I will. Yes.
And Laura, I think, is too busy with Lyft, but I see her posting interesting things as well, Fernando. And thank you for your feedback.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.